God is the most powerful being in the universe. Would you agree? But yet somehow, for some reason, we think that in our own businesses that we can do better. So that's why we always tend to stay in this place of hustle. That's why the hustle culture is so big, is people think they can do better than God. And so we're taught to force everything in business. If you work really, really, really hard and make things happen and you focus on your own performance and really forcing things, and maybe you can get successful. And so we try to force everything. But the question is, what if we wouldn't need to? In fact, I believe that by showing up in a place of forcing everything, we actually shut off God's blessing and his flow in our own lives. See, our reward just becomes our own, because what we sow, we will reap. And so if we're sowing in performance and work, then all we'll reap is our own performance and work. But if we sow into the kingdom, we sow into the presence of God, the flow of God, then we'll reap in the flow of God. One sounds better than the other. In fact, if you sow to your own experiences and your own performance, then what you'll reap is empty and shallow. It kind of accounts to nothing. It's like, well, what was that for? But when we sow according to the flow of the Spirit and his compassion and love, we'll reap something so much bigger that goes way beyond our businesses. That goes way beyond the things that we're building. It's eternal. It's better than. It's bigger than. But here's the deal, again, performance, force versus flow. When we're in the place of force, it kind of leaves us in a worse state afterwards. This is why we see so many business people get burned out. They're stressed out, they're burned out, they're anxious, and they're depressed. Like, how many people do you know from that? In fact, I know a guy, I started having a conversation with a guy a year ago where he had built a multi-million dollar business. I think they were doing over $90 million a year, if I remember correctly. But he was burned out. He was done. He was stressed. He's completely worn out because he had forced everything. But what if we don't need to do that? What if there's a better way? See, instead of forcing everything, what if there's just a way to flow in God's blessing and flow in his design, where everything just kind of comes to us, where we, in fact, accidentally step into the destinies of our business, into the things that we're actually meant to create and be and become, and it just flows. Well, let's actually think about that. Let's explore that in this video. See, take the man Jesus Christ. Jesus, while being fully God, had set aside his divinity to be a man, to be fully man, and to walk as a man on this earth. And as a man, he did not start his ministry until he was 30. Now, in the natural mind, we can look at that and we're like, well, why didn't he start earlier? Like, why didn't he start when he was 20? He would have had 10 more years of ministry. How much more could he have affected people's lives? But here's the reality. He didn't start earlier. Why is that? Because if he would have started earlier, he would have been doing it out of his own power as a man instead of out of the Father's flow. You see, we think everything needs to be done now. We're in the culture of now, of I want this now. I want to have a successful business right now. I want to make $1 million right now. I want to XYZ right now. But here's the deal. The pace of God's grace tends to be slow. It's more natural. It flows more. It doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't force things. It doesn't mean it doesn't show up and show up well and work hard in that showing up, but it doesn't do it from a place of force. It does it from a place of flow. It flows from a place of deep love. Again, let's take a look at Jesus and how he actually started his ministry. When we go back to it, there was a wedding in Cana where he and his disciples went to. And in this wedding, when they were at this wedding, they ran out of wine. And they would have multiple day feasts in this wedding. So running out of wine wasn't a good deal. And Jesus' mom looks at him and asks if he'll fix the problem, knowing that he could, which is interesting. Maybe he was doing it at home, who knows? Where his mom's like, hey, could you make some wine here? And he hands him a cup of water. And he's like, yeah, here you go. Whatever the deal is. But when she does that and she asks him to do something about the problem, Jesus looks at her and says, no, it's not my time yet. Do you know what this demands of me when I actually do this? It's not my time yet. Because he wasn't going to try to force his destiny to happen. Instead, he moved with the pace of God's love, of his grace, of the flow of God's destiny for him. He only did and he only said what he saw the Father do and say. He was so in tune with his own Father, with God, that he would only do and say what he was doing and saying. So he didn't need to force things. And that's the beauty of it. He knew that in due time the Father would bring the things about that needed to be brought about. He just knew it. He trusted in this state of trust. And that's exactly what the Father did. And he did it through Jesus' mom, because Jesus' mom, what did she do? Well, she didn't listen to Jesus. She looked at the servants and said, hey, just do what he tells you to do. Just follow his lead. So Jesus, moved by compassion in that moment, in that state of love, Jesus tells the servants to go fill these giant water jugs with water. So they fill the jugs up, and after they do, he's like, okay, now take a ladle out, go taste this water. And they're like, okay, that's weird. Why would you taste the water, right? But they do it, and guess what? The water turned into wine. A miracle happened. And this is the thing that's interesting. That's how his ministry blossomed and showed up, because through the miracle, people talked. And when people talk, they wanted to know more. They were like, well, if this guy can turn water into wine, what else can he do? And that's why they started following him. And that's how his ministry started. He would go and walk among the crowd because they'd be following him, and he'd be moved by compassion. And as he was moved by compassion, his ministry was built. And in 3 years, he turned the world upside down. He completely shifted society in 3 years through his disciples. Again, it took many years for it all to be established, but we're living proof as Christians that this happened. But didn't have to force things. See, when we're tied to God's heart of love and we focus on simply following the lead of the Spirit, we'll accidentally step into our destinies. We'll build businesses that take off just like Jesus' earthly ministry did, without trying, without forcing it to happen, simply by showing up in love, aware of what the Spirit is doing. This is really the difference between flow and force. See, forcing steps ahead of what God is doing, trying to make things happen. And out of that forcing, it's like Abraham, where he tried to force his promise that God had given him, and he birthed Ishmael because he was trying to make it happen himself, which caused nothing but trouble. How many times have we tried to burst something by ourselves in our own power, force it, and it just caused trouble for ourselves? But flowing with the Spirit at the pace of compassion, Abraham birthed Isaac, God's actual promise. It wasn't forced. It was a flow. And if you want God's promises to overtake your life, you're going to have to stop forcing things, especially in business. Now, let's break this down and make this practical for ourselves. How do we actually start flowing in our life and our business? Is there a way to do that? How do we do that? Well, I broke down to a couple steps for you. Number one is we have to get clear on God's promises. See, many of us live lives where we're just living by the dreams of what the world, the culture around us, has told us that we should have. The American dream. Have this big house with a white picket fence and lots of money in the bank and the most expensive cars with these kids and all these different things, right? Where we're keeping up with the Joneses. But what if that's not God's dream for you? See, because this dream and this promise that we take hold of never originated from the heart of God for you, no matter what you do, you'll be stuck trying to force things. You'll try to force it to happen because it was never on his heart for you. He had something so much better, so much richer. Therefore, it's very, very important to seek out God's promises over your life. What does he actually dream for you to have? See, before Abraham could have Isaac, he needed to know about the promise of his son. He needed to know that there was a promise there, that God said is going to happen. So what is God's promise for you? What does he long for you to give you and to have, for you to have in your business, in your life? See, it starts by, and this is the invitation, we have to seek him out. Sit down and we dream with him. We see his desires, all of which are good, over our lives and businesses. Practically for me, like I've had many different visions in my life where, one, I saw myself speaking on a stage in front of people, teaching like this in front of a video to thousands of people and people hearing it and taking hold of it and being like, wow, that's really good. And with that, I've also had countless prophetic words about business and about being a millionaire. God's promises over my life. Now, I spent many years trying to force these things to happen. But until I let go of that and surrendered the promise to him, I had the clear promise, but I surrendered it to him, and I started going by his flow, did those things not start to actually naturally take place? See, it's the same way with Jesus. He knew what was going to happen. He had a relationship with the Father. So in that relationship with the Father told him, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what you're created for. As a man, as my son. This is what you're created for. And this is the plan. This is what's actually going to happen. Now, Jesus, he could have taken that and just gone out and like tried to force it like Abraham did with Ishmael. But no. He just spent time with the Father and found that promise and decided to hang on to it. Like, okay, it's going to happen in God's timing. But there's a little bit more to that. We need to know the promise, number one. But number two, we need to then carry that promise near to our hearts. We need to carry the Word of God in our hearts and meditate on it, to get clear on it, to really know it for what it is. See, we must believe what God says about the promise. Because if God gives you a promise, but you do not believe the promise, then when the opportunity presents itself, you're not going to take it because you don't believe it's actually for you. You're not going to believe that it's actually true. I see many Christians in business who have promises of doing these great things and these great exploits, but they're not really doing them. They're struggling, constantly struggling because their beliefs don't match up to God's promises. They've let their beliefs keep them from his promises. Their lack of belief, their doubts. So we must have faith. And so we must grab hold of those promises, put them in our hearts, and then take God at his word, because that's what he told us he's going to do. When we do that, this will produce the faith that we need to actually step into the promises. See, many people hear a word from God, a promise for their lives, but they don't hold it in their hearts. And so when the opportunity of the word comes up, they aren't prepared for it because the belief doesn't line up. Therefore, they miss out on the opportunity. Again, this is just like the Israelites. When they were given the promise of the promised land, of this land flowing with milk and honey, they were given the promise, they left Egypt, and they went toward the promised land. But when they came to the edge of the promised land, they looked at the giants, and doubt arose. And in this doubt, they chose not to take the land. The promise was there, but they didn't really hold the promise near to where they fully believed it to happen. And so doubt entered, and they didn't take the promised land. They missed the first opportunity. They had the full opportunity to take it right then and skip the 40 years in the wilderness. But they missed it. And as soon as they missed it, and God said, okay, I'm going to send you out to the wilderness for 40 years until you can actually believe in the promise that I gave you, and so you can step into faith and do this. But when he tells them that, they're like, oh, shoot, this isn't good. We don't want to go into the wilderness. We're going to try to take this ourselves. So then they go from the flow into the force. They try to force it themselves, from doubt into trying to force it themselves because they didn't want to go into the wilderness. Because they didn't know the benefit of the wilderness. Because the benefit of the wilderness takes care of all the doubt. It gets rid of the doubt. It gets rid of the slave mentality that will keep you stuck in Egypt and away from your promise. And that's what it'll do for your life. But they could have, again, if they would have right away believed God in his word, the moment they came up to the promised land, they could have taken it right away and skipped the wilderness. But they didn't. So they had to go into the wilderness, and then they tried to force it. And again, it didn't work. Don't make the same mistake in your business, in your life. Yet, here's the beauty of this all. You don't have to worry if you have made the mistake, because the simple reality is I've made this mistake many times where I wasn't prepared. I didn't believe the word. And so when the opportunity was there, I didn't take hold of it. And because I didn't take hold of it, I missed opportunities. But the goodness of God is that he always brings the opportunity back again. Like even Israel, like they missed it that first time. They were put into the wilderness, but guess what? 40 years later, God brought the opportunity back. It's like, no, now it's time to actually do it because you're actually ready now. You actually believe the promise that I gave you. So let's take it. You actually have the faith for it. And so that's what happened. In the same way, God is going to take you through a wilderness season. If you're not ready for the promise yet, if you don't fully believe for it, you're going to experience a wilderness. But in that wilderness, know the truth of it. It's there to cleanse you and take away the things that are going to keep you from your promise. It's not a judgment against you. It's just there to help you actually prepare to take the land, the promised land, when the time is there again. Because he will bring back the time, because that's the goodness of God. Truth be told, I've done this multiple times in my life. I've missed opportunities, but then I've taken hold of different ones because they came back around again because he's good. Like even creating this YouTube channel is an opportunity. I was doing it earlier through force quite a few years ago, and God told me to stop. It's like, I want to teach you things yet before you do it again. But then the opportunity came again. He's like, hey, you should start with the YouTube channel again. So I did. And I'm making these videos. So again, it starts with this. 1, get clear on God's promises. You got to know the promise. But then 2, hold it on your heart until you fully believe it. Let faith build for it. Believe that it's going to happen. And as it rises up, you're going to be able to take hold of the opportunity when the opportunity presents itself. And then number 3, this is the third thing, is we must build an awareness of the Spirit of God. See, again, Jesus only did and only said what he saw the Father do and say. But the only way to see what the Father is doing and saying is to build an awareness of him. We must become aware of what he's actually doing and saying before we can see it, right? It's pretty obvious. Only in awareness can we actually see. And this is really the biggest key to go from force to flow. Because when you're in awareness, you're not going to jump ahead of him. And you're not going to stay behind when he's trying to get you to go forward. Instead, you're like, oh, that's what he's doing. Okay, I'm going to go do that. Oh, cool, he's doing that. Oh, I'm going to do that. The problem is right now, let's be honest with ourselves. Chances are we're in a state of unawareness. A medicated state that's brought on through entertainment. And I mean, I'm looking at you, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, through these little bits of entertainment where we're getting these dopamine hits that keep us unconscious and unaware of what's really going on. So in this state of unawareness, we don't actually know what God is doing. And so because we don't see what he's doing and know what he's doing, we kind of stay stuck in this state. And I see a lot of people do this where they want to build the stuff in their business, but they're not actually showing up in awareness to what God is doing in their business. They're distracted. Because they're distracted, they can't really show up. They just have to force things to happen in their business. And that sucks. So the truth is, we don't know how to sit in silence. We don't know how to meditate. Instead, all we do is medicate. So our awareness of the Spirit of God is stunted. We have no idea what he's doing or what he's saying, or even worse, we don't really, if we're honest, we don't really know God at all. We don't really know his heart for people. And therefore, we have no other option but to force things to happen in our lives and our businesses. But if we start practicing awareness, and this is the beauty of God, as soon as we start practicing that awareness, we become present in His presence. He's always there waiting for us to meet Him in that place, to go into that place of awareness. And if we're consistent in it, we'll actually start flowing by the Spirit. We'll always see where He is moving and what He's saying, just like Jesus when He created His ministry. So how do we do that? Well, we start by being silent. We start by focusing, increasing our awareness, practicing His presence, getting to know Him, spending time with Him. It's very simple, it's very practical, but it takes intention. And the invitation's there. You can do it if you want to do it. That's what it comes down to. Again, what did we cover so far? One, we must be clear on His promises. We must know the promise before we can step into it for our business, before we can flow. Two, we must then actually hold that promise near to our heart so we actually believe it when the opportunity presents itself. Then three, we must build that awareness of the Spirit so we can flow as He flows and go as He goes. Then four, final thing is we must be moved by compassion. You see, at the core, God is love. Like, that's His identity. He is love. And so as we grow in awareness of His Spirit, we're actually going to start being moved by compassion. This is the same compassion that Jesus was moved by that caused miracles to happen in His ministry. Everywhere He went, He didn't need a forced ministry to happen. Instead, He let His Father's heart of compassion overtake Him and move Him for the people that He was serving. So as He was moved by compassion for these people, He would heal them, He would teach them. Again, if you read the story of Jesus, how He walked, He was constantly moved by this compassion. And it was beautiful. See, He wanted to see people set free. He longed for them to experience wholeness. This moved Him to serve the people. It moved Him in love. Simply put, when we are moved by this same compassion, nothing we do in our businesses and our lives will need to be forced. It will all come from overflow. Just a deep desire to actually serve the people in front of us. A desire that moves us to action. Take, for example, this story. This is a local story of a guy that I'm going to call Steve for the story. And Steve, he hated to mow the lawn. Like, he just didn't like to mow the lawn. But then he got a girlfriend. And one Saturday, his girlfriend came to him and was like, he wanted to hang out. And his girlfriend was like, I can't. I got to mow the lawn first. And guess what Steve did? He's like, I'll mow the lawn for you. So he did. He went and mowed the lawn for her. And he enjoyed it because love moved him to action. He didn't need to force it. He didn't need to like, oh, I got to work this up. I got to make this happen. No, he was so in love, and out of this overflow of love, he acted out on it and mowed the lawn for his girlfriend. And it was something he actually enjoyed to do because it was from this state of flow, from this overflow of love. And in the same way, when we are moved by compassion for the people that we're called to serve, then we won't have to force things again. And we'll naturally, almost accidentally, step into the promises that God has for our lives and our business. It's really that simple. And here's the deal. At the core of this, and this is the final of this message, this is what this is all about, this video is all about, is we weren't meant to force things. But because we're constantly stressed out, we're anxious, we're depressed, we're burned out, all these things that we don't want. But the good news is we don't need to. We don't need to force anymore. Instead, we can simply follow along with what I taught you in this video. Is one, get clear on His promises for you and your business. Hold those promises near to your heart so faith is built. 3, build an awareness of the Spirit of God in your life. Practice it. Be intentional. 4, be moved by compassion for all things. And when you do, you'll notice that you don't need to actually force anything. And just like Jesus' ministry took off, so will your business when you start doing this. God's blessing will overflow in your life. It'll come with ease as you stay in that state of awareness and compassion. So that's the invitation for you today, is take some time. Seek out God's promises for your business. What does he want for you? What does he desire? And seek out his compassion. Get into that state of awareness and build your business from that and see what happens. In fact, I would love to hear what are some promises that God has for you in your business. I'd love to hear them. Put them down in the comments.